You know what? Can we skip this?
NDAF.
Perfect.
Hey, this is Mark Wheaton, and I'm here with my silent, never-speaking producer and engineer, Ken Plume, and welcome to NDAF, a space in which neurodivergent folks and their friends can talk all things spectrumy in any messy direction they want. I am thrilled to welcome our latest guest to the show today. Jacque Ben-Zekry is a producer and writer on one of the best pieces of speculative fiction on TV these days, Apple TV's Emmy-nominated, but more importantly for this show, Saturn Award-nominated, adaptation of Blake Crouch's landmark thriller Dark Matter, the second season of which drops Friday, August 28th. Jacque began her career in genre fiction as an editor overseeing hundreds of novels, including New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestsellers and books nominated for every award under the sun, from the Edgar to the Silver Dagger to the Harper Lee Prize for Legal Fiction. Without further ado, here's Jacque. Jacque, welcome to whatever this is. Thank you for doing the show.
Thank you for asking me to do whatever this is.
I guess I want to start, where are you right now?
I'm in Colorado, Durango, Colorado. Yeah.
Just to kind of let the listener, plural maybe, kind of in. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in eastern Washington State. Real hillbilly country, or rednecks, I think is what they prefer to be called out there. I grew up outside a smallish town called Kennewick, Washington. It's near Hanford, Washington, which is, famous for the Manhattan Project. And it's also, fun fact, because I love fun facts, the most polluted place in the Western Hemisphere. So there you go. That's what I got.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
That's
and I moved to Seattle. I was born in Seattle, and I moved to Seattle when I was in my very early 20s. And so I often just tell people I'm from Seattle because it's easier than explaining the desert.
I don't know. I think what you set that up with first is so much better than, oh yeah, I'm from Seattle. That's everybody. It's like, no, I'm from the most polluted place in the hemisphere. It's even better.
There you go. Thanks, Oppenheimer. Yeah, anyways.
So where does the genre start for you? When did you first kind of get into speculative fiction, crime fiction, horror genre? Where does it start for you as a reader?
Yeah, so my relationship with reading has always been sort of a tenuous and awkward one. I had undiagnosed dyslexia. So all through school, I struggled to read. I was held back in first grade. I just was one of those kids who just had an extremely hard time, and nobody really understood what was going on with me. And that's, one of the many hallmarks of poverty for those of you who are listening who know what I'm talking about. By the time I was in school in the 80s, people should have been able to detect dyslexia very early on, but it just didn't happen that way for me. And my father was a huge reader. He's very into alternative history and a lot of sci-fi. He was a big Dune guy. He was always reading. And my mom would always say, smart people read, which of course always felt like a dick, Yeah. It's brutal. But when I got a little bit older and I started feeling like people that sort of imposter syndrome, people could tell that I wasn't a very good reader. So my mom took me to a used bookstore and we bought Jules Verne, 2000 Leagues Under the Sea. And she was like, you don't have to read it. Just put it on your desk and seem like you're a smart person who knows how to read. And I was like, okay, cool. And so that was sort of began this history that I had with, because my father read that kind of stuff. I eventually did read the book and, didn't understand all of it, but I read the words and I, kind of knew what was happening. And then when I was a little bit older, my uncle introduced me to this series, a fantasy series called The Dragonlance Chronicles. And that was truly the first book, which, by the way, real nerd deep cut here. Dragonlance is a series of books written by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman who were playing Dungeons and Dragons and used the storytelling device of their adventures, and they wrote them down as their books. So I became really into those books, and then Dungeons and Dragons, and fast forward to, I'm a little bit older and still had a difficult relationship with education, but was watching a lot of sci-fi, like Star Trek, obviously, and then a little bit later, Fringe and Bones, and some of these shows actually taught me a lot about the scientific method and science and sci-fi, and encouraged my interest in researching more and learning more and finding out what things they're talking about in Star Trek are true and which things are fiction. And, it's a long-winded answer, but that's my history in that.
Well, it's interesting because Bones obviously comes from a writing that was like, okay, we're going to present and speak about a neurodivergent character on screen. And there's so many ones that kind of use a trait but then are like, oh no, that's not actual. Like, no, I'm just a pillhead or whatever they did on House. But Bones was one of the ones where they actually kind of engaged with it. Mm-hmm. Were you at a place where you could see yourself in that, or were you just kind of like, oh, this is just, I just like how this procedural is writing out?
A little bit of both, I would say, for sure. I think, I really identified with the fact that she wasn't concerned as much about the social realities and that she was still successful. I think that really appealed to me. It was like, oh, you mean you don't have to mask all the time and you don't have to, the ADHD thing is you're always reading the body language of everybody in the room to see if they're mad at you, and she didn't really care about that. She cared. And what was really great about that character, I actually just recently rewatched the whole series because I have to have sound on to do things, typical. Yeah. And I was listening. So we watched it recently, and there are all these things where you see her learning social things because it matters to her and she wants the people in her life to feel good and not because it is some sort of protective thing. And I think I really gravitated towards that. I mean, that show came out, I'm trying to think, when I was in my early 20s, and it really spoke to me in a way that felt very important, Were
there others that on Fringe, or were there other shows where you're like, oh, I relate to that character as well? Or was it pretty much her? Or were there other, even in movies?
I mean, the quintessential ADHD character, which breaks my heart because they never actually say it, in my mind, is Parks and Rec, Ian Poehler's character in that. For sure, that is the one where it was you mean boundless energy can accomplish almost anything, will become a subject matter expert so that you could be vaguely employed in that field just because you want to know things. That obviously spoke a great deal to me. But yeah, on Fringe, the dad, I remember thinking, and I think that he comes across I think they say he's mentally ill, but to me, he comes across as burned out his brain neurodivergent, which is pretty common. And so I really felt a lot of that, the sort of wandering interest in your own ideas and seeing them through, and the dedication and the intelligence needed for that. It's, statistically more geniuses are neurodivergent than neurotypical. And I'm not saying that because someone's better than somebody else, but I think that there is an expression of the way that our brains function differently that gives space for a different type of intelligence. And it is extremely enjoyable for me to see that on the screen. I loved Data when I was a kid. That was also one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Oh, you just know everything and you can just retrieve it when you want. As a kid with a challenged memory, I was like, that's...
And your best friend's a cat and you can do Gilbert and Sullivan at the drop of the hat. I'm like, that's my life. That's what I aspire to. So.
Yeah. And that makeup situation.
Yeah.
You mean it doesn't matter what you look like? You're just yellowish.
Yeah. And then you have this brother who's better at it than you, and you're jealous because you're kind of like, if only I was that. So, yeah.
And along those lines, I really always felt a strong, and this was a very early love affair of mine. I couldn't read the stories, but I loved Sherlock Holmes, another example of a definitely neurodivergent character that just was committed to their own abilities and desires and interests, but also still cared about other people sometimes. Yeah.
For fictionalization, one of Ken's friends writes a lot of books about Victorian and has a book on Dr. Joseph Bell coming out later this year.
Oh, cool.
Who Doyle based on. And I'm very curious to read the differences between Bell and how much for an audience for the Strand magazine or whatever you had to kind of be like, oh, maybe he gives this much of a about Watson. So I'm very curious to see where her research led her in that.
Yeah. And I think, because therein lies also sort of the line between what we would consider to be on the spectrum and what we would consider to be narcissistic, which by the way, those traits do cross over because of black and white.
It's a Venn diagram. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just the black and white thinking. It's all that sort of stuff. But I think it's very interesting to to parse that out by looking at the real person. That'll be really fun. I also just want to give a shout out to Agatha Christie's Poirot, another example of somebody that in my mind, the viewer and the reader is asked to just see him as Belgium, which makes him weird. Yeah. And that, we just lost.
The short foreigner with the big mustaches.
Yeah, he's a weirdo, right?
So he's already out there.
Yeah, but his attention to detail, his peculiarities, his need to have things be organized, that sense of justice, the idea that especially, you see this a lot in autistic communities, the idea that justice is for everyone. It's a much more liberal leaning idea about humanity because you don't feel that stuck in the middle of groups kind of dynamic. And his expression of that, I think, is just such a wonderful, and again, we just sort of say, oh, it's because he's a foreigner. It's nothing to do with that, in my opinion. It's just on the spectrum, probably.
But to his friends, he also diminishes. He's also like, oh, it's the little gray cells. He has that, he knows enough. He can't mask, but he does just enough of that kind of like, oh, it's not that I'm this thing. I like the food. I like the travel. It's just this little thing that I have. And you're just kind of like, yeah, because everybody diminishes their own abilities. So
totally.
Even Christy does it with him.
Oh, for sure. And I think that to some degree, I mean, reading Christy's biography, you do sort of wonder if she was somewhere in the neurodivergent world, and so in a way, I wonder if she was trying to express some part of herself that she couldn't also share with the world, especially at that time being a woman and somewhere on the spectrum or ADHD. It's not simple.
Yeah, I've been reading a book on Muriel Spark. And it's hard not to, as she talks about like hating people and loving cats, and Patricia Highsmith, who hates people and loves cats and just lives on her own in the Matterhorn and just ignores the world. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, you don't want to be the person who's like this historical figure and that historical figure. But as you're reading it, you're like, it has a name. I mean, it's very, there's so many familiar things in Muriel Spark. So
I think across artistry in general, you see it all over the place. It's like you hear these stories about the weirdo painters, what I mean? And I do think that, the idea that a lot of them were suffering from depression and stuff is very real. But when you look at the communities that exist today and the studies that exist, depression is so part and parcel with ASD because of like the pressures of masking in society. And also within ADHD, we see it similarly. The reasons that we see such an increase in dementia is that we burn out our brains. We don't, if you're not medicating, it creates these sort of environments. So I think a lot of the things that we've chalked up to mental illness across the history of artistry is really like not well cared for neurodivergence, which is pretty sad. Yeah.
Yes. If we can go back to you, I meet you many years later as an editor. How do you become, after having a kind of contentious relationship with the written word, how do you then become somebody whose entire life is consumed with the written word and with authors and page and editing?
Wow, that's a good question. So I started working at Amazon because my first husband wanted to go to law school, and I was decidedly not going to be somebody with that kind of a scholarly kind of career, at least so I thought, ironically, right? So I was like, the reading is hard for me. Passing a history test is easy if it's an essay. It's very difficult if you ask me to remember one date ever. Over. So I ended up getting a job at, like I said, I grew up in a lot of poverty, and we did not have there's a lot of housing insecurity and food insecurity. So my goals when I was younger was really just like have a job that can pay enough to keep me eating. And so I was working at this coffee shop, and my husband had like actual goals and dreams, and that was a novelty to me in a way that I hadn't experienced before. My relationship with all of that was so distant. And he'd had a job where he had health insurance and things. And I think we were 23-ish or something. And so I needed to get a job that could make us enough money for him to go to school full time, because he'd been going part time, and have health insurance. And so Amazon was hiring at a call center. And to tell you, like, if you were to propose that to me today, I'd be like, that's a dumb job for someone like me. But at the time, it was awesome because it's all just numbers. It's like, how can you solve a problem and solve it correctly, do all the right things, say all the right words in the right order, and still get it done quickly and be the very best math person on your team? Like, I was like, go. I mean, hyper-focused like crazy. And so they used to do this thing where they would hire, I don't know if they do it anymore, like 2,000 people around Christmas, and then only 200 got to stay. And I was converted really quickly because I was like, yes, 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 yes. And then that same sort of way of thinking got the attention of some people who do process improvement and statistical analysis, Kaizen stuff. And I was always suggesting new ways that we could change the software that was internal to Amazon to make it more efficient. It's just how I think, And so they're like, hey, would you like to do some complicated math and like sit in and like look at like one of the concepts of Six Sigma, which was what we were trained in, was like you analyze all of the defects, and then you take the biggest ones, and then you analyze those, and you distill it down until you can solve the most problems with the least amount of change. And
I mean, wow, that's pretty cool, but still,
that's
pretty neat.
So it's like, why are people calling? What's the number one thing people call about? TVs. What's going on today? You just keep, and you listen to thousands of calls, and you categorize them, and you put it all together, and it was like awesome, and I loved it. So they poached me and I started traveling around the world doing these projects, like going to call centers and fulfillment centers and being like, how can we be more efficient? Which runs you into software development people, because sometimes the solution is on the website, right? Like sometimes it's not the internal tools that need to change. And so I was approached by the shoe division, which at the time was called Endless. That was the name of the website. And they were going to have to shut down shoes because they weren't making enough money off of it. And the big issue was the returns. I'm not going to get into this whole thing, but anyways.
I'm interested though, because I get shoes from Amazon. So there was a problem with shoes. Okay.
There was a problem with shoes. It was, So the problem was mostly having to do with how we return shoes, how we make sure shoes are still able to be used, and how people get the information they need to buy a shoe, the right shoe, the first time. Like if you can't see the sole of the shoe and you have a foot issue and you need the full sole rubber bottom and you're forced to then order 5 pairs of shoes
right.
works for you because it's not exactly listed. Well, one of the big solutions that we came up with, and this was actually not mine, but it was a genius one, was like that they have like a 360 camera. They'll just put every shoe in so that when they're uploading it. And so but that idea came out of doing this analysis and this full Greenbelt project. And then, which is just a lot of math, big fancy words for math. And I loved taking someone's personal experience and defining it statistically and then solving it statistically.
Right.
So I ended up redesigning the returns process for shoes, which ended up redesigning the returns process for Amazon, because then the whole thing has to line up. And that in the first year saved the shoe team like $2 million, which is like a rounding error in Amazon's tax return.
Right.
This is like 2000. I don't know, like 14 or 12. No, it must have been 2009.
Yeah.
So it's like a lot of money. And that got me some, heat, as they call it. And I knew enough people in the design sort of world that were interacting with the people at Amazon Publishing that I was sort of recommended for this job. I was the, let me think, I used to know this. I think I'm the 8th employee, or maybe the 9th employee of Amazon Publishing, which at the time was just called Encore. And what they were doing was using statistics to determine which books were about to sell more and then picking them up, republishing them, repackaging them, and pushing them really hard to get the books to sort of move up and sell more. And it was a really cool project. And I loved it because it kind of, the whole ethos was great books don't have to come from traditional publishers. They don't have to come through gatekeepers. They can just be what people love to read, and it can be trash and it can be great literature. It doesn't really matter what you love. And so at this point, I was a big reader. I had devoted a lot of my life and time to becoming somebody who could read. And I taught myself how to read in paragraph form, which is pretty common for dyslexic people. I don't read I either read the individual word or I read the whole sentence or paragraph, and then I sort it out in my head, the letters and words in the right order. And so at this point, I was reading quite a bit, and I had always thought it would be so cool to have a job where all you have to do is read for a living. Yeah, be careful what you wish for. Actually,
what are you reading then? What were you reading then? Where you're saying you started reading a lot? What was it?
I was reading a lot of science fiction at that time. And I'd been working at a bookstore previous to the coffee shop thing. So I'd read a lot of they would just give us ARCs, those are advanced reader copies for those people who are not familiar, and be like, we want you to read all the books that you think are going to be popular. So at this point, I had read all the big books that had come out in the 90s and early 2000s. And I had also, on my breaks, would just literally sit down and read a quarter of an Anne Rice book on my lunch break or whatever. I would just pick up things and read them. So I had become this not necessarily fountain of knowledge, but I had all the inputs.
Right.
So back to when they were sort of headhunting me, they were looking for somebody to help build a team whose job it was to understand what makes authors happy and to resolve their issues, and then also help with the process by which we make books, because that was still a new thing. They were still learning how to do that kind of stuff. And I had this history in the fulfillment centers and statistics. And so I just kind of came in and created the job. It was called Author Relations Manager at the time. I don't know if it still exists even. And my job was just to what makes an author happy? Can we quantify it? And then how do we make it better? And the funny and interesting thing about that kind of statistical analysis when you're talking about humans and human behavior is the things that you assume that are obvious are not true. Making more money made a lot of authors happy, but it wasn't the thing that made them the most happy, And so that was very interesting to get into that more human psychology side of it. And eventually I was reading. I started working with the marketing team because a lot of things that make authors happy is like knowing that someone's trying to sell their book. So I got involved in that. Covers, product descriptions. I loved that job. That was like when I was doing the marketing stuff was really, really fun. But the problem, and this is again, it's just like statistical thinking. The biggest issue for a marketing person or an author relations manager is that you should buy a really good book to begin with, and you should then market it really well, and then the author and foster the author's talent. And not being a part of the buying the book process was like so hard for me that I really like made that my goal to move into. And Blake Crouch one day at this party, we were talking. This was before we were publishing him. It's just like one of those, we were at BoucherCon hanging out with mystery and thriller writers. He sent me this short story and asked me what I thought of it. And he was, I think, trying to get insider information about Amazon, but I was so naive I didn't understand that's what was going on.
As happens.
Yeah,
like, who wants statistical analysis? This is ridiculous.
Yeah, he was a big self-published author at the time, so I think that's what he was after. But instead, I read his story and literally sent him like 9 pages of notes on like a 12-page story or something crazy like that. It was all character stuff, and like people don't think this way, and maybe you should change the order of the reveal here to make it more suspenseful, and so he was like, came back to me and was like, I want you to edit my next book, which was Pines. And we were trying to buy it at Thomas and Mercer at the time. And I was like, oh, I can't because I almost got fired. Like, I'm not an editor. I wasn't supposed to give you feedback, even on a story that we weren't publishing. But for those of you, your listeners who don't know this, like when you work for a tech company like that, they own your intellectual property. You're not allowed to do things without Amazon permission, even if it's outside work, really. Like if it could be tangentially related to your work, you're not allowed to. And I didn't really understand that. Or didn't care. Probably didn't care, actually.
I was like, there's two things going on there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's the Venn diagram. And so that's when so he called the president of Amazon Publishing at the time, Jeff Bell, and said, I won't sell you Pines because we were after that book, unless you let Jackie be my editor. Huh. And so what began as me, and that series went on to be the Wayward Pines series, which was our first series to sell 1 million copies. And so what happened was that partnership got me a little bit of heat. And suddenly and the deal that Amazon made me was like, I could edit books as long as it didn't interfere with the work and I didn't represent myself as an editor at Amazon Publishing. So I just never did, but I kept getting clients because people kept calling me because they saw how much better Wayward Pines did than any book Blake had written up to that point, how much better received it was from like a story standpoint. And then that's when, again, that sort of like the push-pull of the statistics on, author relations and marketing meets the heat that I was getting from doing it well from a story standpoint. They just were like, one day they just came into my office and were like, you're an editor now.
Well, where do you see yourself on the page in those? Like when you go, I don't know if you go back and read those books, but where are the big obvious places where you're like, okay, this is what I brought here. This is what I brought here as this kind of partnership begins to evolve. What did you love about the piece? And what did you say, okay, this is what I can bring to the piece as an editor, if you remember at all?
Do you mean specifically Pines or do you mean
the series?
Yeah, that series. Well, interestingly, the thing that I really affected the most in that series is the genre of each book. So the first book is hands down thriller. Leans a little horror. Blake is naturally a horror writer. And then the second book is a procedural. It's a straight up police procedural. It's just a mystery that they're trying to solve. And Blake wasn't really into mysteries, but he knew he wanted to do something different for that one. So he was calling me like every 3 days, asking about the tropes, the structure, how do procedurals usually get laid out, which they do follow a formula that you don't have to follow. But if you don't understand the formula, you will really disappoint your readers. You at least need to know the rules that you're breaking when it comes to a mystery. And then the last one was horror, straight up horror, The Last Town. And that one was the one that I think I had the most story changes to, for sure. Like initially the story was just the Abbeys come into the community and start killing everybody. It's just nonstop, runny, jumpy, shooty, bloody stuff. Right. And I was like, dude, it's just not the way humans humans like our synapses.
Right. You can't process. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's too much, like nobody likes a horror movie that's just, endlessly sewing people's mouths to butts. You have to have something between those parts. So,
I mean, that's a tremendous example. So yes. Okay.
Yeah, but I watch a lot of horror movies, but I don't like body horror. But that was one of the big things was I was like, we need these interstitial chapters. So those chapters where you see, I think it's not Ryan Holder. I forget the name of the character, but the guy who's like out scouting, all of that stuff was like, definitely. I was like, you need to do that. We need to space them out this way. This is how the reveals should attach themselves to the next scenes. So for sure, that series like initially has just a little bit of my fingers on it. And for sure, I was the one he was like, I'm thinking that Pines is going to end up being much more sci-fi than in the end than thriller. And I was like, how's it structured? And he's like, it's structured like a thriller. I was like, then it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Like the readers, they don't care if the end is like fire in the sky. Like, they just want the experience.
You're on board. Yeah,
exactly. So
are you thinking of yourself as I remember talking to you years ago and notes that I had read, I was like, you're coming at this as a writer. And though it is an editorial relationship, but your thinking on writing was very writerly. Were you at this point at all thinking of writing independently? Or were you just like, no, I'm going to work on all these different pieces for all these different authors? Where do you start? Where does your authorial journey begin, I guess?
Despite the fact that it was difficult for me to read, the only class that I ever really excelled in school was definitely like creative writing stuff. I've always been a voice-heavy writer, which can be a downside, as you know. But it can also be a positive, like if you know how to harness it and use it and change it up, I think about Andy Weir as being really successful at having a similar voice in all of his books, but they are also changing and evolving, which is kind of fun. But I was winning a lot of like short story prizes and little awards within like schools or even in the district when I was quite young. So I'd always had an interest in writing, but I had, because of ADHD, and I didn't understand, I wasn't diagnosed with that till I was like 40 or 38. I didn't understand. I couldn't sit still long enough to formulate and put the things together and like actually write. And so that's why I think I was kind of a late bloomer to actually writing. But yeah, I think I did always approach it from the standpoint of like, not me as a writer, but what, and again, this goes back to like, I'd spent so much time studying what authors like and what they want and how they think and what they want out of their, not just their publishing experience, but their editorial experience. I'd spent so much time understanding that I really always approached all of my edits from the, what is the author actually not just wanting, but like, they're trying to communicate something to the world. What is that? And if it's not being communicated in a way where I think it's going to be effective, what are the suggestions that I can make that would make that better? And I always thought of my suggestions as like creative jumping off points. They're not the right solution. But when you give like 3 or 4 ideas and you rewrite chapters for people to show them what you mean, you are actually engaging in the writing process in a way that I think I didn't realize I was as engaged in as I was. And I don't think I really understood it until we got to the point where, when I left Amazon and started my own business and was doing modified editorial, and I started seeing a lot of books being, really successful. And there is like a pride in that. And I loved helping people with that. But there's also this part of you that's like, but that was kind of like the thing that they're praising was actually my idea.
Yeah.
You feel a little left out. And I think that's when I started realizing that I needed my own creative outlet to actually start writing in a realistic way, because that longing was becoming distracting from helping people have a great book, which is still something I love to do. But I was missing that other part of it,
So just hopping back real quick, those first stories that you were writing that you were winning these competitions with, do you remember, were they, this is my story and this is where I'm from, or this is this, or were they just, this is science fiction, this is a crime, this is something else? Were you writing very much of your own life, or were you already writing like far off fiction?
I was writing genre for sure. And I was writing some sci-fi. I remember, I was like a little, I hate using this term because it makes you a poser to say it, but I was like a little punk rock kid, so I know. Attack me on the internet. It's true. But we had zines, and I would write the stories within the zines as a character, a different person, and I would write the different things, and I had different writing names that I was doing, and we would, every word was spelled wrong, but we would photocopy them and staple them and give them out to our students, and it's embarrassing now, but at least they were only physical, right? You're still talking about the 80s.
What names? What name? What your name's going after? Okay.
So I was doing a lot of that. So that was expressive, I think, because I was pretending to be somebody else, writing pretend real stories. So that was like a little more, I would call that a little bit speculative. And I was writing quite a bit of science fiction. I was trying to write fantasy, but that is such a beast. Like the structure on those doesn't fit short stories really. But I did a lot of crime. That was probably my biggest thing. I wrote a lot of stories, and this is where the inspiration from my own life does cross into the stories I was writing. You know, like I had like a tumultuous relationship with my stepfather and my mother, and it was very, you know, and as is common in poverty areas, there is an intersection of crime, even though I don't believe that just because you're poor it doesn't make you a criminal. That's not what I'm saying. But like that their overlap is really high. You are sitting on the bus waiting for the bus at the bus stop with people who are actively in gangs going in and out of school and stuff. So you're just exposed to a lot of different things. And so that was like the area where I was, you know, living in this like sad trailer park, writing stories about, inspired by the people around me and their relationships to crime and my own experiences with crime, which was a lot of it.
So then there's this gap. There's you writing this, you working with a number of crime writers. Some are now the most read crime writers. And then there is you writing on television. I am missing something here, or what is the first step towards your first on-screen TV credit?
So the first step is at Meow Wolf. Have you been there, Mark?
I've been to the Vegas one, yeah.
Yeah, even to the Vegas one. Meow Wolf approached Blake. So for those who are listening don't know what Meow Wolf is, it's this sort of interactive story experience that is also art. And the New Mexico one was inspired by the multiverse. And it's the idea that this house they built the actual house, you can open up with a refrigerator, it's a door to another dimension and stuff like that. And each dimension has its own world and story and backstory and history. And you can walk through it. And I recommend walking through it sober and high, just, you know, if you partake, that is. But you can just walk through it and look at the art. But I spent the whole time like reading the journals that they had and then trying to figure out the story, like because it is a mystery. Like what happened to this family? Why is this house being pulled apart? What happened to the missing daughter and the son and like all this other stuff? Blah, 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 blah. And they approached Blake and they're like, hey, we're designing one for Denver and we love your book Dark Matter, and you know it low-key inspired some of the art that we have here, wondering if you would like to help us come up with a story for the next one. And for a while he was very interested in it. We went down there, we talked to them quite a bit, and driving back from seeing that place, I immediately had this idea, which I'm not going to say here because I might still make this show one day. But I immediately had this idea. And then Blake and I talked about the whole way home, and we'd rented this beautiful Mustang. And I was like, doing 110 through New Mexico, which is, you got to do that once in your life, kids. It's beautiful. And we got back to Durango, and I was like, and we were like really high on this idea. And then the deal didn't work out for a variety of reasons that have to do with the business and industry. But we still had this idea. And then COVID comes, and M. Night Shyamalan called Blake, and they're like old friends. And Night was like, hey, do you have an idea for a show that could be like, he just had Servant come out on Apple and it was doing quite well. And, you know, 30-minute drama is fairly novel. Like The Bear does it. A few people do it, but typically drama is an hour. So he's like, I'm looking for 30-minute drama that leans horror. You know, what do you think? And Blake was like, I don't know. And he gets off the phone. He comes up. He's like, what do you think? Like, you know, it's COVID. It would be kind of fun to use this time to develop something. And I was like, we should do the idea. Right? Like, right. And this is just like an example of like impulsivity and ADHD in action, where like we called Night and I pitched him the idea. Right. I'd talked to Night before, but we were not business associates. Just like some chick who shows up who's like, and then this, you know?
Liquid autism.
yeah, exactly. Like hulked out on it. Got really hyper focused, was super excited and like high energy. And that's one of my superpowers. Like I'm a wind up toy. You can get me passionate about something and I'll be like, you know, and like put people on board. But so then it was like, he was like, I love it. Write the pilot. Let's start, you know? And like, so then Blake and I started working on it, and we were co-writing all the scripts and creating it together. And we got pretty far down the road. I mean, we had probably 5 or 6 scripts. We were really geared up at that point to take it to Apple. And because Night had like an overall deal with them or something, and it could be part of his slate. And then, we went to visit him, and we started getting conflicting notes, and I love Knight. I would work with him again in a second, but it's you're dealing with like a serious person who has a perspective. And it became very clear to us that the perspective was diverging pretty far from ours. But I will say what's positive about that experience is like the very first thing I ever wrote was noted by Blake Crouch and M. Night Shyamalan. And it was written in front of a firing squad. I've never not been playing with live ammo. I've never not been like having serious, I was never a part of a writer's group in the traditional sense. I wasn't writing scripts for fun and going to classes. I just was like, I believe that I can do this. And so I just did it, and that's pretty much being trial by fire.
But you said before that some of the dyslexia, some of the ADHD makes it hard to actually sit down and put pen to paper, typed paper, whatever it is. How did you do that? What is the process that got the words actually onto the computer screen for you?
It was a weird sort of transformative moment, and I would be curious to know if you have one like this for yourself, Mark, but like I could not stop the pictures in my head. And I have like many people with ADHD have like a very strong connection to music, and I think a lot of people on the spectrum do have an interesting relationship with it as well. And I'm not saying that they're not the same, but like, there is the whole sound theory of like brown noise makes you focus. Pink noise helps you be like, have greater energy. And like, there's certain music, EDM is really popular within the ADHD community for this, like where I just started having music connected to pictures that I couldn't stop in my head. I kept hearing and seeing the story and seeing this character. Her name's Lily. I just kept seeing her life. And I was like, I have to write this down. Like it became really, compulsive. And I think that was my first true experience with like a different kind of hyperfocus, like the truly creative hyperfocus. It was very different and life-changing. I became immediately very addicted to it. And then later I started, like at this point I had been diagnosed with ADHD, but I was not medicated yet. And Adderall definitely changed my life. I know there's a lot of people out there who have like issues with it or don't have good experiences with it. And I'm not here to preach that at people, but I do want to take a moment to do a little like aside and say like,
Well, I'll just reach around this corner and grab this bottle. So we're all good on this show. Yeah.
No, like, for people out there who are hesitant, who have ADHD, just a quick reminder, and you should look up these studies yourself. Like, we are 40% more likely to develop dementia than neurotypical people or even people with autism. Like, it's a very high, scary rate. And when you use stimulants, you actually help your brain process more easily and you're not burning yourself out as quickly. You're not getting that fatigue. You're not getting like the crazy, I can't remember things, I can't retrieve brain fog. You're not fighting through difficult things. And by doing that, when you do that all the time, you're burning through your salt, you're burning through minerals, magnesium that make your brain work better, and you're depleting yourself. And so you're more likely to end up developing dementia. And I just want everybody out there to know about those studies and go look them up, because I think there's a lot of people out there who are like, I suffer and I'm upset and I get headaches all the time and I want to die, but like, I don't need Adderall. And I'm like, bro, at least like, talk to a real doctor.
Have a pamphlet. Take this pamphlet. Do what you want with it, but, put it in your console or your glove box. But have the information.
Anyways, once I started doing that, it got a lot easier. But, it's still hard. It's still extremely difficult if I'm not feeling it. Like yesterday, I'm writing a new show, and I was stuck on this scene that I couldn't see. And that's a real problem. Like Blake doesn't have that problem. Blake is like, I can sit down and I can organize and I can figure things out. And it's very, I think it's a function of his black and white thinking. It's like he can just put his creativity in certain boxes and access them. I can't. I have to like drop into some emotional sense and I have to actually see it. And so if I'm not there, I might just spend all day like walking around my yard, listening to music, trying to like get something to come to me. So for that reason, my writing is a lot more emotional, which I think is both my superpower and my downside, because then when you have the actor come up to you and be like, I think this scene is dog shit. I'm like, cool. I cried all night writing it. That's great.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Oh, that's fine. I will rip the guts right out of this. Yeah.
That's fine. Right.
So of how you wrote yesterday versus as you're describing these first pages that you started, how similar is that process? How did you Or how are there things you've evolved to make it easier to what you were trying to do yesterday? Or did you kind of have a discipline already like, I'm going to do this in longhand, or I'm going to open Final Draft, or I'm going to write this in paragraphs in Word? Like, how similar is your process from where you began and where you are now?
It's very similar, I would say. Like it's interesting.
Well, do you outline first, or do you just go?
I tend to just go. It's very weird, not weird, but I watched this, I saw this, what's it called? Interview. I went to a WGA event a couple months ago, and it was Ryan Coogler and Chloe Zhao and Ryan Johnson, and they were talking about their process. And a lot of them were like, I like to spend as much time as possible delaying the writing and just living in the idea.
Right.
La, 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 la. And there's a lot of like, and I'm not trying to talk shit. There's a lot of woo-woo kind of conversation in there. And I was like, bro, that is not my vibe. Like,
like this is work. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love what I do, but really when it comes to the writing part of it, like I sit down and I'm like, I'm going to write this scene and I'm going to figure it out. And that's my job. And then for me in the writing of the scene and in the placing it in a script, I often realize that it was wrong, but I have to actually do that to see that it's wrong or to find the better answer. I have to actually
draft after draft after draft, or
yeah. For sure. Like that's definitely much more my process. But I also have to write it down because I'll also forget. And that's a function of ADHD memory. There are some things that I will remember every single word and I will know everything about it for the rest of my life and I can never let it go. And then there are other things that it's like, I have this great idea. And then like 20 minutes later, I'm like, what? It's gone. I retrieve and there's just blank space in my head. So a lot of it is like also just like protective. Like if I don't write it down, if I don't journal it, which I do journal quite a bit, or if I don't go and write it in Final Draft, it's gone forever. And I can't do that stuff. Like it's too crazy.
Chuck Tingle, who's an autistic author, he writes very much on social media about not so much, or he has written about not so much working through neurodivergent characters, but making sure to de-neurodivergent his own writing. Mm-hmm. And until he articulated in that way, I was like, oh, wow, that's true. The over-explanation, or this kind of thing needing to be this for you, but doesn't work for the readers, or in your case, the viewers. Do you ever find yourself doing that? Or is a lot of your winnowing and editorial work against you having that issue with your own writing because you already are editing as you go?
That's a good question. Well, let me just go back a little bit. One of the things I think that was very interesting about my career as an editor, both when I was in publishing and then when I was, well, I guess both careers were in publishing, but like when I was at a house versus when I was doing developmental editing and a freelance style, a lot of my clients were on the spectrum. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that I'm naturally so character first, that the making sure that they're extremely developed and well-rounded is like what people hired me most of the time to do. That was like 75% of what came to me. And I didn't realize that what was happening was that sort of iconic traditional pairing of an ADHD person and an autistic person. Like that's the powerful team right there. You know what I mean? We could take over the world, right? And so it's like, oh, I'll just solve problems all day and you'll have big ideas and together, blam, blam, blam. But I think that was a lot of what I was doing was really, really, really diversifying other people's characters. So when I dropped into writing on my own, it was much more natural for me to push it that way, not into a neurodivergent space. That said, the very first story I was telling you about, which was called Thin Places, and hopefully one day I will still make, was about a neurodivergent person, And I think that is an important way to start with character. Is like, how does their brain function? Does it function like because they're an alcoholic, or does it function because they are a mother, or does it function this way because they have ADHD or on the spectrum or OCD or, Tourette's or whatever? Like there's a lot of different ways to sort of think about that kind of stuff. For sure, I am extremely also inspired by our actors. Like, for sure, this season 2 of Dark Matter, Ryan is just straight up ADHD because Jimmy is. I write most of Ryan. Why not? Let's just go there. And it's an interesting, we never say it out loud, but it was an interesting question. Like, how does the corridor work if your brain doesn't focus in the same way as somebody else's? And like, does that mean that it's going to be I think it means it would be extremely hard for a person with ADHD to get where they want to go. But I also think somebody on the spectrum would probably get where they want to go relatively simply, And so like, we do all of this really quiet, subtle stuff even in the show without actually naming it, which I think is, again, goes back to what you mentioned at the beginning is like, there's a lot of these characters that exist, and adding neurodivergence or taking it away, I think should be a conscious decision that all writers are making, just like whether your character's gay or whether your character's trans or any other life experience that adds to who they are.
Talk about the name was Lily. When you approach writing a neurodivergent character, we have 100 years of really terrible, tropey, like people are just a basket of their traits on TV. And or they'll pick and choose. And the only time you ever activate that character is when they're using their traits to help the main character like solve a problem or some crap. And then they'll be like, oh, they don't actually need an emotional life or any kind of thing. How much of that weight do you bring to how careful you have to be with having a main character who's neurodivergent when you were working on this? Or we were kind of like, I can just shove, because all of that is useless to me, I can push all of that aside and focus entirely on creating this character that I know to be true when you started writing a neurodivergent lead?
I started with well, that's an interesting question. So I want to make sure I answer this in a way that is like correct to
this is a messy ass show. You can answer it however the hell you want.
Yeah.
No one can talk about this. That's why there's a show.
So I'm going to talk about dark matter really fast, just as an example of like my philosophy. So we show Leighton in our show, Leighton 3, who's my favorite Leighton, Party Boy Leighton, who...
Best dressed, Leighton.
Best dressed. He's my favorite. He has figured out life. He's going to party his way across multiple universes. He's not hanging out trying to make money or steal lives or rape women. Right. It's great. So, shout out to Jason too. Anyways, there's this scene where we see that there's a naked man sleeping on his couch who gets up to get water. And in all of that, we are implying a level of queerness that we never actually discuss about Leighton.
Right.
And in season 2, there was a conversation because I think, and so does Dio and Blake, like that Leighton 1 at least is not, he's sort of a non-sexual entity, but I would call him probably more pansexual than anything, like interested in experiences, interested in all kinds of people within those experiences. So we have other Leightons that we're showing, and the conversation was, how much of that do we actually want to show, like that he's queer? And I remember where Dio really landed on it, because we were at certain points talking about things and showing certain things and showing not certain things. Like we had this whole idea for a threesome. This isn't giving anything away because it's not in the show, where he's like with both, And Dio was like, well, is that actually serving the story, or are you just trying to make a caricature?
Right.
And I was really trying to reach for something that was like, how do we give more heart to a character that had been sort of the bad guy in season 1? Like, how do we show the different layers of this person? But I was fixating on a layer that is a factor amongst hundreds to consider. And so I think so that was a really sort of a formative moment. But going back to your original question, when we were talking about Lily in Thin Places, her neurodivergence is extremely important to the story. And so with her, I was imagining her. So just I'll give you a little bit of information. Like, she has OCD and it develops into agoraphobia. That's how. So what we're watching, we meet her when she's agoraphobic and she's trapped in her house. But we go back and we see how all of this was triggered and where that came from. And all of that does have to at least start, because agoraphobia is very commingled with OCD and control, does have to start with understanding her OCD and where that comes from and how it has affected her life and how she coped with it before these traumatic events and then how she's not coping with it after. So I think, like, when I think about neurodivergence in a character, I think about rather or not, again, like Riot in the Corridor, does it actually affect the story? And if it does, then I want to make it a big part of it. And if it's not really affecting the story, then yeah, it's just a character trait. It's just like, wow, it's working with somebody that you has a one-track mind all the time. Like, you can kind of guess what that means, but we're not necessarily saying it,
Very interested in this about you speaking with Dio about Leighton. How does your neurodivergence affect you as a producer? I mean, we've had people on here before who are like directors and editors, and the editor version has like their neurodivergence affects their being an editor in a very, very different way from being on set every day, 18 hours, like working with actors. Where does it find you as a producer? Where does it find you in post? Where does it find you in rehearsal? And does it affect you? Or is it something that aids you in certain places? Or are there other places where you're like, actually, I'm not going to do that job because I don't think I'd be good at that? Like, where are you as a producer with that? Is something all consuming like dark matter?
Well, I guess I'll start with the sort of the negative part of that question because, ADHD. I have to figure out how to feel rejected in all moments, Mark. For me, I think my impulsivity is a real issue around like executives. These are people who are looking for a reason to be made uncomfortable by you. That is like their entire, they are anxiety, all day, every day. And so somebody like me who accidentally says like one wrong word is terrifying to them. Whereas you say the wrong thing, like you don't want to say the wrong thing to actors, but like you can get forgiven. You can be like, right. Oh, I didn't mean that. I meant this. Sorry. Like, and you can be a human amongst humans right. there. It's much harder. I found one of the best things about my partnership with Blake is that he's extremely good at the executive thing. So I'm just like, cool. I'll say something good on the call so I don't look like I don't care, but it's fine. I would say that having my ADHD in every other way, though, makes me extremely good at this job. It's going to sound really crazy and out there, but like when you're producing a show, and especially like 9 or 10 episodes that are hour-long movies, and, we lived in Chicago for season 1 for a whole year, for season 2 for, 11 months. Like it's 12 hours a day. 5 days a week. Rehearsals are frequently at my house on the weekend. You're never not working. And Blake and I wrote every single episode of season 2. So any minute that you had between things you had to do to actually produce the show was spent writing still and doing edits and doing notes. And of course, actors and directors have notes. And so, like working through all of those. So
and these are complicated episodes. These are action. These are complicated to direct. This isn't 6 people in a room speaking. These are very complicated, effects heavy. Like
we're not Succession, though. I love that show. It's not like that. Yeah, you're right. It's we. I don't want to sound too full of myself, but whatever. We call it the F1 of television because, like, on the same day in season 2, we filmed a partial. This is a bit of a spoiler, a bottle episode. We filmed a war zone the next day. That was a oneer. And then we filmed the day after that, we did let's just say, complicated fight in the corridor with stunts and all that sort of stuff. And this is like, so think about that crew. Think about that experience for a special effects person. Think about the VFX. Think about our production designer, our locations. In our first block of season 2, we had 72 locations. So it's like your teamsters are just like moving trucks 24/7. You're just always on the go. You're always going somewhere else. Yeah. That is like my dream though, Mark. Like I love this job. I love it because of the variety and the difference every single day. And I love it because it forces me to live entirely in the moment. So our jobs break down pretty evenly. We co-write everything. And that is very even. People probably don't believe that because Blake is obviously a better writer than me, but like it really is 50-50 on the page and we're editing each other's work. And then I go and I do what's called prep. And for people who are not familiar with how television specifically works, like writer is God and film director is God. I know you know all this, but just for people who are listening. So we are the only people who are the continuity all the way through the whole show. So we hire the directors, we hire the actors, we find the locations and hire our teams that do amazing work. So I go to every single prep meeting because for those of you who don't know, prep meetings are like every single car that's going to be on my show gets talked about in a meeting for that episode. Every single shot gets talked about. Every single location, you go and see all of them in advance. Every costume is talked about. What story are we telling? What's the racial background of the background actors in this scene? What is so every VFX, special effects, props on our show, props have like 4 meetings per block because we're building all kinds of new and interesting sci-fi gadgetry. Our set deck is crazy because we have like labs in some scenes and then the next scene we might be like, in a desert and things are exploding or whatever. Like you have all kinds of different stuff that you're introducing into the show every single day. And then also these A-list actors who are extremely good at what they do and want things taken care of and they want to rehearse and they want to understand, all their stuff. Joel Edgerton famously doesn't memorize his lines until the rehearsal because he wants to see the space. He knows what the scene is. He's read it multiple times, but he's not actually thinking about how to know his words until you get there. So all this stuff is extremely important. Everything is really important. And attending every single meeting, the reason I do that is because you start to hear the problems and they bubble up in different meetings in different ways. It's like rigging. John in rigging is talking about this, and then somebody over and, you're hearing this from the grip department, and then I'm hearing this from the Teamsters, and you're starting to figure out how to solve 5 problems with one script change if you're in every single meeting. So if you don't attend the meetings, then what you do is you have your department heads running up against the wall, not able to solve problems because half the time the problem needs to be rewritten in the script, or the decision needs to be made by somebody because the director wants one thing, but the DP wants something else, and your line producer is saying this, and the studio is saying this. Like, it's my job to make the final call. So I love being in all those meetings because it's the better way to solve problems. And like I said, you have to live in the moment. Like, I don't know for sure what I'm going to go talk about next. I show up and they're like, okay, we're here to talk about Daniela's painting in episode 4. We need to commission a painter. What is the painting going to be of? And what's the style that you want it to be? And how many versions of it do we need so we can show her painting at different points and show it up on the thing? And what are the other arts that you want in the gallery when she goes in there and sees that? And like, I didn't know that we were talking about painting before I walked into that room. I just walk in, engage, and walk out. It's fucking awesome. It's like the most dopamine.
There's the university, when they're running through the university, the end of season 1, and there's just the quickest, like, double stair. There's like a beautiful stairwell that you use. And I was just like, and it's there for 1 second. I'm like, once again, choices. And then it just keeps going. And I'm like, every single frame in this thing is so thoughtful.
Everything.
And it's choices and choices and choices and choices. And I was like, and it's that attention to detail that you as a viewer are just constantly brought back to the theme. So I don't know. So it works.
Thank you. Yeah. And like, if you look at the end, you see all those like 72 Jasons or whatever. Every single costume tells their story. And our theory was the sooner their Amanda either died or left, the more crazy they were because they didn't have that active therapy and somebody to talk and help them through things. And like that comfort of just having another person who's going through something with you, it would mess you up in a different way. So like, if you look at it, the more crazy ones are wearing the oldest costumes that Jason started off with, because we figure Amanda's the only reason he ever changed his clothes. She's like, you smell, we need to go get new stuff, right? Well, like you start so every single Jason has to be branched, and their story has to be told by what color their hair tie is, or what kind of hat are they wearing, or do they have a scar right here, and all these different things. And like,
and how fresh is that scar in some cases? Like, where is that wound? Yeah,
exactly. So, is it a lot, or is it a big burn? Is it healed? You have that Jason 13 with his big scar up here where he tells the story about what happened to him, which we use in season 2 again. Like, there's just a lot of like cool storytelling pieces, and the only way to do that is to have a writer in every single meeting and be like, that's what it's supposed to be, or this is how it's supposed to look, or this is the story that we're telling here. So I love that part of it. I would say I love the writing too. I mean, development is brutal because it's like people are noting you about things that they don't understand because they don't understand what's going to happen because you haven't started filming. And so that can be kind of tiresome. But again, just smile and be like, we'll work on it. It's good. Editorial for sure is probably the area that is the most like writing. But it's writing truly by committee. I am extremely lucky that the editors that we have are really fucking wonderful people and really good at their jobs. 2 of them also have ADHD, so we'll be pinging on music and pinging on cuts in the same way. I'm like, it needs to land here. Like, I was thinking that too. Vibrating on the same scale, which helps a lot. But editorial is probably also the area where after, like, I'll do on an episode that I primarily wrote, I will do the first like 3 rounds of edits with the editors and like the notes from the studio, and then I turn it over to Blake because at that point I'm like, just show me when you have a whole new cut. I don't want to see the scene 72 times because then
you can't see it anymore, or
it's my ADHD. I cannot. Like, I literally stop paying attention. I stop listening. I stop noticing what's happening, and so it is a little trial and error because sometimes they will change something and I won't see it until like 2 cuts later, and I'll be like, "Why'd you do that?" Like, well, bitch, you should have been engaged in the meeting. But yeah, I mean, other than that, I do a lot of VFX stuff. Like, I watch I do 3 meetings a week on VFX, and it's just like, do you like this version or this version? It is an eye test. But I love that because it is also like you're learning about how they make VFX and what kind of, how they actually do this process. And I've learned so much about cinematography and lighting and all this other stuff actually through the VFX process, because how you shoot it, you don't get to just repaint it. It has to actually match to some degree the real things. And so that's been, I don't know, a lot of why I think I have ended up being good at this job is because I'm just wildly curious about dumb shit. So I'll just be like, oh, teach me all about lenses today.
So would you ever do that? Would you ever like, oh, I want to direct this episode so that I can work with actors in this way? Because it sounds like you obviously have a lot more control as producer writer, but would you ever be interested in just, okay, I'm going to direct or anything like that? Or is that just so like, that's just not really something that interests you?
Wow.
Just to do it once even, just to even do it one time.
Okay. So without giving anything away, we have an episode in season 2 that is directed by Guillermo Navarro that, because of the way that a bunch of budgetary and interesting things happened, he only had 8 days to prep, and then we only had 8 days to shoot it. So it's very uncommon for our show. Our show is much bigger than that. And because he didn't have as much time to prep, and our show, as you point out, is extremely complicated. We have like 3 or 4 versions of each character who have different character arcs. They have different histories. They have different emotional levels, different things that they're doing. He was like, I need you to be on set with me. And this was the last episode we filmed every single day, which is not that. I mean, one of us is always on set, but I might go and have lunch and take a phone call and like miss a few takes because you don't need to be on every piece of coverage. He's like, I want you to be there all the time and be with me because I don't want to make a mistake in some of these character dynamics and scene dynamics, which is fine. Like that's totally great. But it was a really crazy episode to do that on because Guillermo comes from film. You know, he's the cinematographer who did Pan's Labyrinth and like he's won an Academy Award. He's done all kinds of, he did Jackie Brown. And so he's worked with everybody. And, he filmed it the way that you would film a movie. He did not do it the way we do television. And it was simultaneously one of the greatest experiences of my life because I learned so much just about how to see things and how to edit and how to put things together. He's cutting it together when he's filming it as opposed to just getting all kinds of coverage and letting the editors deal with it. And we actually had our editor there, Tim, for it. And he was showing me how Guillermo was already cutting it in the filming, which was really cool. But like I was running most of the rehearsals like in a very serious way. And I was much more involved on the day with like working with the actors. And it was like so much fun and so interesting. And I really enjoyed it, but it's exhausting. There's a lot. I think if I were to become a director, I'd have to become much better at masking because I have an extremely expressive face. Like you can just tell. Mark knows this, you know, right? Like, I'm infamous in the world of publishing of being like, I don't think Jackie likes the book. Really, she likes nice things. Yeah, but did you see her face? You know?
Did you watch her physically throw it 70 stories down from the building? Yeah.
Yeah, it was like I'm famous for Jackie Smash. That's like what most people know about me.
I have stills of that from panels. So I have actual photographs. So I got that. That should be the thumbnail of this episode.
Yeah, it should be. That'd be really funny. Yeah, so I was just like, so I think that there's a part of me that would be very curious to do it and would love to do it. And I would love the challenge, but I also think like, oh, you know, I also know myself and I know what will make me really unhappy. And there is a certain level of like being on set that is dealing with group dynamics that are very different. And I'm a big believer in that, even though Hollywood is an extremely abusive and toxic place, as you know, probably even much better than I do. Like, it is also, we were very committed to our set and our crew and our actors never experiencing that and not doing that to each other and setting that example. And I think, you know, there was this one time where we couldn't find my script. It was my fault. I had actually put it away because I didn't want to lose it. But then I forgot I put it away, ADHD, and it had all of my notes in it. And I was like, I mean it, Colleen. That's my assistant. I need you to find my script. You know, and you just like, you feel how easy it would be to become the person that you don't want to be.
Right.
And so I think at least for the next few years, I would rather focus on, you know, figuring out how to be an actually like, that kind of person, you know? What about you? Did you ever want to direct?
I directed theater in college. And after like 3 rounds of that, I was like, no, that is not who I am. So it's a good way out. You were saying you were writing as of yesterday. What is the next thing? What are you working on right now? And is it are you working on script pages? Are you working on prose? Like, what is the thing that you're working on now? And kind of where do you see yourself progressing as a producer, but also as a writer?
So I'm not a creator on Dark Matter. It was created by Blake. And, I was actually asked to come in right when filming started to help producing and things like that. So I kind of came in a little bit into the process. So season 2 was the first time I had like soup to nuts done the whole thing. And I really enjoyed the creation process in a way that I did not think that I would. Like, we broke the entire season in a month. We had it all laid out. And it's really kind of funny. I was looking through season 2's notes, the original, and it's like, yeah, it's moved around and the locations changed considerably, but it's the same thing, which is really great and amazing. So I think the show I'm working on now, which is a script, is being created together. And I would love to tell you all about it because I think you would actually really love to hear about it. But until it's announced, I'm not allowed to tell you on this podcast, but maybe have me back when it is announced because I think, Mark, you will enjoy this. But yeah.
We applauded your first screen credit on Dark Matter last year. We were both of us, we were just like, So that was pretty great.
That was a big uphill battle too. Credits. We could have a whole conversation about that for people at home who are curious about how that works. I know how bullshit credits are. Let's just say I wrote a lot more.
It's a war and there's a strategy. Yeah. So, it's pretty great.
Mm-hmm. So I think that I would like to stay within this medium for a while. I am currently also at the same time I'm creating this new show with Blake. We really want to do Dark Matter season 3. It was always imagined as 3 seasons. And I think nobody ever gets the chance to complete something like that in this particular industry. It's always the quest for more cash. And how can we have 79 seasons, even though we've beat the dead horse already so hard on the storytelling and looped our character moments? That's we don't want to do that. But we do want to finish the arc of where we are. So that's the actual thing that I'd love to do. And then this other thing that we're creating, and I'm also writing a spec script right now for film. I'm very curious about film. I think that if I was going to ever direct, it might be in that area because I think that that's more interesting to me than television directing. Not that there's anything wrong with television directing. I work with beautiful, amazing television directors, but I just think it's you're moving from project to project so frequently. And what is
it? Can you tell? Is it speculative fiction? Is it science fiction? Is it horror? What are you?
It's horror. Yeah. It's a genocide in the U.S., which does not sound very appetizing, but it's fun. It's really
my daughter got out of obsession the other day and was like, I will never watch another horror film for the rest of my life. And I'm like, that is the exact response. That is what you want. That's what the kids like these days. So
you want to be terrified. And I think there's something interesting political to say there and emotional to say there about why we kill, why we dehumanize, why we treat people the way that we treat them. That goes beyond, that I actually do think has to do with neurodivergence and has to do with a lot of different things. The way that we feel empathy and the way that we see people who are different than us and how we treat them. I think there's a lot of people listening who probably have been hurt and treated very badly. Let's just look at the actual occurrence of RSD. It's you've heard 35,000 more negative things about yourself by the time you're 8 than your neurotypical people. So much of neurodivergence is about trauma. And so talking about that in this screenplay has been really actually sort of emotionally fulfilling. I'm hoping to sell it this fall, but who knows? I also fully expect to be fired because that's how writers are on film.
Oh, yeah. I keep seeing the interviews where people are like, I see myself as a contractor, and if I don't deliver the right house, I am fired and gone. And I'm like, yeah, there is a very different... The shrunk world of features is such a different animal right now. Mm-hmm. And successful kind of journeyman studio screenwriter, it is a very different situation for a lot of them now. So
I can see myself wanting to write a book in a few years because I'm going to be maybe I do want.
Write it now. Publish it in a few years.
I know. Yeah.
Make sure you get everything on the page before you're like, where was that? Yeah.
No, we've talked a lot about that within places. Should I just write the book first? And the idea of sitting down to write a book, though. And it shouldn't be this hard because I literally edited hundreds of books, 600 pages in some cases, massive fantasies, whatever. I'm still it seems like a lot of work. I'd rather go sit in 800 meetings about what tires I want. Whether or not I want them to actually slash the tire on screen, or do we want to just see it already slashed? That's the kind of I talk about all day.
Well, which is cheaper? I mean, do you need the stunt? Do you need the person there? Because if it goes wrong, what kind of day is that? Versus, there's the flat tire, but that's not as active. So the viewer's not like, So yeah, a million little decisions.
Oh, and I often make my decisions based on what the crew seems most excited about. My special effects guys are like,
which is great.
Yeah, we got permission to blow up charges inside Lake Michigan. And I was like, let's do it. And our cinematographer's like, you'll never see those at night. You're just wasting money and time. And me and the special effects guys, Ryan, are like, let's do it. Yeah.
That is the best way to end this episode of the podcast. That is the greatest ending we've ever had on this. So I'm going to leave it there because we will obviously pick this up a year from now when your show's on the air.
Well, it comes out August 28th, so I can come back sooner than that if you want. But yeah, I'm around.
I'm looking forward to finally, because season 1 ends with, and I'm just kind of like, and it's like, okay, season 2. And I'm just like dreading. Just dreading it as a viewer because I'm like, everybody's happy and everything worked out and everything's fine. No, it's not.
No, it's not. So, I don't believe in happiness, Mark. You should know that by now.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on this and talking to people about being creative through one's neurodivergence, using one's neurodivergence, whatever it is to get you there. So again, we really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Good luck with season 2 of Dark Matter and beyond.
Yes, thank you.
And that was Jacque Ben-Zekry. Dark Matter season 2 drops on August 28th and concludes on Halloween Eve on Apple TV. You can find Jacque on Instagram at Jacque Ben-Zekry, all one word, and hear more from her when she takes the stage at San Diego Comic-Con later this month on Saturday, July 25th from 2 to 4 in Hall H, alongside Dark Matter stars Joel Edgerton, Jennifer Connelly, and Dio Okaniyi, as well as producer Matt Tolmack and her co-writer and partner, Dark Matter creator Blake Crouch, with a sneak peek of season 2 going down the night before from 10 to 11 in room 6DE. Until next time, this is NDAF. NDAF is produced by Ken Plume, and our theme song is by Mike Furman.